turn to the audience and see if there are any questions for the panel. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Sorry? 3 or 4 questions, I've been told. Are there any questions for any? And when you raise your question, please tell us who you are, your association, and to whom you're addressing the question.
Harry, we talked about information, communication, and technology. And we all know from the history that wrong information, disinformation, misinformation, information without integrity can create enough problems for all of us. Is it not time now for the information technology experts to devise some system of self-audit to make sure that information put out is not engineered or planted? Thank you.
You know, I'm one of those people who believes that the answer to bad information isn't to censor that information, it's to put good information out there. It's more information as opposed to my idea of right and your idea of right, of sometimes of what is correct, is sometimes going to be in conflict. And I think the correct way to do this is, I actually like the Wikipedia model. What Wikipedia is, I put my, and I'll give you an example. About 4 years ago, when Wikipedia first went up, the term digital divide was a subject matter in Wikipedia. And apparently some guy in Britain decided that he was the guy who coined the term. Well, a friend of mine saw that, sent it to me and said, you ever heard of this guy? And I actually hadn't. And he decided he was going to correct it and went to some records and put that information up. And there was a war back and forth on Wikipedia as to who really came up with the term digital divide. That, I think, is the way it should be. You should, if there's information out there you disagree with the new information technology, with the types of user-generated content that we have. And one of the wonderful and beautiful things about what's going on right now with things like YouTube and MySpace and Facebook back in the States, which is coming here, is the ability for anybody who is a former consumer of information to now be a writer, a user, a developer of information. I think that's only going to become more and more important, and it's going to become more and more empowering. Because if there's history and you think it's erroneous, you can correct it. If you see a politician misbehaving, you can post it. Not that they would ever misbehave, sir. If there is something you want to tell the world, you have the opportunity to. So I don't want to see filters on the net. I actually want to see a net that's free of filters and gives people unfettered access and the ability to tell their story in their way, in their language, with their pictures, and with their aspirations. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir. And by the way, if anybody else wants to respond to that last question while we're waiting.
You did it well. Absolutely.
Yes.
Shailesh Gandhi here. Larry, the question is to you. You made a very valid comment that instead of the top-down approach, there should be a listening to what the users or the consumers need. So probably look at today's program, see if you can spot even one speaker who reflects that reality. I don't think it does. So do you really believe that unless you start listening to that bottom, this can really achieve anything?
I absolutely believe it. You know, my day job is back in the United States is as a consultant. I consult with corporations, I consult with nonprofits, and I'm on the board of a nonprofit called EDC. EDC does some work here in India, edc.org. It's a phenomenal organization. We're all over the world. And one of the things we're doing is we're rethinking how we're going to respond to the global needs. We work mostly in health and in education. A lot of our funding comes from other philanthropies, from federal government. And one of the things that I've been pressing on my fellow board members is the need for us to go out to places and ask what the problems are they need to be solved, and then come back as a partner. There are tools we have, there are management styles we have, there's access to revenues and resources we have, but we don't necessarily have a real sense of what the problem is. And the unfortunate reality is, whether it's Delhi or Brussels or New York or Geneva or Washington, we often say, well, we know there's a problem out here and here's how we're going to solve it. Instead of saying, we know there's a problem out here, let's talk to the people who have the problem and ask them how they would like us to help them solve it. And even the best foundations and best corporations are very guilty of this, and I think it's something that has to change. It's something that it's going to require a lot of, you know, most of the people who rise to the top of organizations that have a lot of wealth and a lot of resources are pretty smart, driven people, and they generally think they have the answers. I was lucky because when I started doing ICT and development work, I had a program that President Clinton and Vice President Gore and Secretary Brown gifted me with, where we went out and we asked people to send proposals to us, where there were going to be public-private partnerships, tell us what a local problem was, and then we would help them try to solve it. And even there, my problem was there were Washingtonians and big foundation people and folks with grants before who were making decisions of what was worthy of being funded. We've got to start changing the paradigm, but it's very difficult. And it's also hard for people at the grassroots to deal with the bureaucracy and the infighting and the politics of how to get grant awards. So there's work to be done, but there are some of us, I think, who understand that we're not going to solve most of the problems for the 5 billion people on the other side of the divide, the 3 billion people who don't have clean water, the 1 billion people who go to bed hungry, the 1 billion adults who don't have literacy. Those problems are going to be solved by people in those communities who understand those problems. Aqua.
I actually, I want to take a little bit of a challenge with you, sir, because I think that, I'm quite sure that most of us here really understand and have spent a lot of time working with the people in the community, understanding their problems. Now, of course, we don't represent them, and I don't want to say that I represent them. But I think that there is a shift that is happening. Nobody that is sitting and trying to do top-down. And I actually take objections to what Laurie is saying. Most of the foundations spend enormous amount of time getting out into the field and understanding the problem. They work with the experts from the field. They get the social innovators from there. They promote these social innovators. It is actually in some ways a challenge here that we don't have the social innovators sitting on the panels with us. But we do that. There are other forums in which we have brought social innovators from the field to sit with us to understand what the issues are. Because there is nobody that really would say that, I know how to solve a problem. It is a collective issue. Even the person in the field or living in a village, there are two different opinions there. And I think foundations are playing a tremendous role in trying to make that understanding and that bridge so that people can truly come together. In a forum like this, it's very difficult to bring somebody from the field to talk about it. But we spend time in the field.
I'm going to take a little bit of challenge to his comment. I have a philosophy called management by walking around. And when I was giving out millions of dollars for the federal government, I had enough money to occasionally go to the people I gave money to. And I went out to a project that I thought had great potential that wasn't doing all it could do. And I sat down with 2 or 3 people who were actually on the ground and who'd been working with my staff and with some corporate volunteers and said, why aren't we doing what we need to do? And it was just me and 3 people from that community who were very active and who would help put the proposal in front of us. And they said, well, here are the 5 things we should be doing. And I said, but we're not doing any of them. And they said, well, your guys push back and they write the checks and do the evaluation. So my problem is the guys who write the check and who do the evaluation get the story they want to hear almost every time. And that's the problem. Yeah, it's top down, it's bottom up until you get resistance, and then whatever you say, sir, keep sending the checks. And that's something we've got to figure out how to change.
Sorry, disagree.
Okay.
And we can, because I think that this is actually a very myopic view that people actually think that people on the top don't understand. I think nobody that is actually doing corporate philanthropy really is out there to say that we want to get our word out. There are few people who do that, but if you look at serious philanthropies, it is not about trying to get PR, nor is it about evaluation. It is about making a difference. People spend a lot of time out there in the field understanding that. And there are many people in this room, including people that we've worked with, who spend time in the field. They're the ones that are making the difference. Our job is to actually support them. It's not to create programs. It's to be supportive in their role. So I think that, Larry, you got to go out and start looking at some of the more innovative organizations that you talked about and see how they function. And they are changing the rules.
I hope to do more of that. And this is the free, fair, and unfettered conversation that we should have on the web and everywhere.